It was dawn on August 15, 1944, and the golden wheat that blanketed the fields of northern Provence stood ready for harvest. A full season of labor, swaying under the early sun, ripe and near perfection. And then the farmer set it on fire. He did it without a word. No warning, no permits, no pleas. He doused the stalks with kerosene, one calloused hand steady as the other struck the match. In seconds, flames swallowed the dry grain. Thick smoke coiled upward, staining the clear summer sky with black. The wind turned greedy, dragging the blaze faster and farther than anyone could control. The villagers came running first. Then the local mayor, waving papers and screaming in French. Soldiers followed, American, British, Algerian. The lead units of Operation Dragoon, the Allied liberation of southern France. They stood at the edge of the inferno and watched a lone man burn what most families would have killed to preserve. Someone shouted, "Is he mad?" Someone else, "He's trying to claim war damage, you'll see, he'll file compensation tomorrow." Another theory, sabotage. A German sympathizer in disguise. The field sat near a critical road the Allies planned to use, and now the air was thick with smoke and ash. Commanders considered detaining the man immediately. But the locals intervened. "No," they said. "That's Etienne Durand. Kvietman. Good man. Lost his wife last winter. Keeps to himself. Just a farmer. Not political. And yet, none of them knew why he'd done it." Durand offered no explanation. He wiped soot from his face with a red handkerchief, picked up a shovel, and began turning over the smoking earth. A burnt boot heel emerged from the black soil. Then a sliver of metal. Then a round, gray dome, unmistakable to any soldier who'd fought in Italy or Normandy. A Tellermine 42. German. Anti-tank. It was live. All at once, the shouting stopped. The fire hadn't destroyed his farm. It had revealed it. The Germans, in their retreat, had laced the entire field with mines and booby-trap. Every step between the wheat rows was a gamble. Every inch of ground meant to channel Allied trucks and tanks toward death. Etienne hadn't panicked. He hadn't reported it, hadn't waited for sappers or squads. He had simply done what needed doing. And he had done it alone. The realization passed from soldier to soldier like a current. The farmer who burned his own harvest had saved their lives. Not in a grand, cinematic charge, but in ash and smoke and silence. It would take days for the truth to reach headquarters. It would take months for the mine-clearing reports to list his field as the largest untriggered German kill zone south of Avignon. It would take years for anyone to understand why Etienne had chosen fire instead of fame. But this wasn't a beginning. It was a culmination. Because Etienne Durand, the man the villagers thought was just another weather-worn farmer, hadn't always lived in this quiet town. And his decision to burn the field was not made that morning. It began far earlier, in shadows, in whispers, and in blood. Before he was a farmer, he was something else entirely. Before he grew wheat, Etienne Durand planted secret. And before he burned a field to save lives, he lived in the shadows to destroy enemies. Long before the villagers of Montvert called him the silent farmer, they knew him by a different name, or rather, they didn't know him at all. That was the point. For Etienne had once belonged to an invisible world. A world of forged papers, midnight deliveries, coded radios, and long silences. In 1940, when France fell in 46 days, Etienne did not run to London. He stayed. And he began to disappear, the first time. He was 27 then, the son of a wine broker from Lyon, raised with fine shoes and Latin verses. The war changed that. His university collapsed under bombs. His brother died in Belgium during the retreat. His parents fled south and never returned. Etienne stayed behind, lost his name, and re-emerged in the undergrowth. The early resistance wasn't romantic. It was desperate. Half-whispers in cafes, smugglers pretending to be farmers, and printers building pamphlets in cellars thick with mildew and fear. Etienne joined the combat network, one of many spiderwebs stretching across the occupied zone. His job was logistics: safe houses, weapons drops, courier routes. Nothing flashy. Nothing that made headlines. But it was the work that let others do the bleeding. And it paid its price in blood all the same. The Gestapo didn't need names. They only needed patterns. And the combat network had grown too confident. A radio man failed to change frequencies. A new recruit turned out to be a German double agent. And one night in 1943, while delivering forged identity cards to a courier near Valence, Etienne was ambushed. Not by soldiers, but by silence. The house was too still. No smoke. No lights. He went in anyway. He found the courier already dead, strangled, bound, propped against the wall like a warning. Then came the boot. The voices. Not French. He barely escaped. A window. A sprint. A bullet that took a piece of his shoulder. A river, cold and wide. That was the end of Etienne Durand, resistance operative, known in a half-dozen towns by a dozen aliases. To the Germans, he was presumed dead. The local network scattered. And his comrades? They moved on, calling his name less and less until it became a footnote in a failed report. He had vanished. Just as planned. He surfaced again 5 months later, 300 kilometers west, in a small commune near Montvert. With new papers. A forged birth certificate. A rural accent he'd never used before. And a wife. Marie Fournier had been the daughter of a Marseille schoolteacher. She was not in the resistance, but she had fed men who were. When the Germans began arresting civilians for complicity by sympathy, she fled north, met Etienne through an old contact, and married him under their new names. No cérémonie. No family. Just the illusion of two newlyweds escaping the war. They bought a plot of land, a stretch of tilled dirt near the crossroads where wheat grew well and mines stayed out of other people's business. The neighbors accepted them, as French villagers often do, slowly, cautiously, politely. And Etienne accepted the work. He learned to farm. Not perfectly. Not quickly. But with the same discipline that once let him memorize train schedules and hide crates beneath floorboard. He fixed broken tools with wire. Watched clouds the way others once watched troop movements. He even began to laugh again, the soft kind, rare, like a stone turned warm in the sun. Marie helped. She smiled more often. Her voice found its rhythm in the kitchen and in the rows of young barley. In the evenings, they would sit by candlelight, reading worn books and listening for the sounds of trucks that never came. For a while it felt real. The Germans did come, of course. The front was collapsing elsewhere, the Allies pushing north through Italy, the Soviets hammering east. But the Germans still held most of southern France with iron hands and frayed nerve. When the 2nd SS Panzer Division passed near Montvert on its retreat north, they searched houses at random. Looking for resistance fighters. Looking for vengeance. They found neither. Until they found a journal. A small, leather-bound thing Marie had hidden in a box beneath the floorboards, tucked beside old photograph. It wasn't a diary, not really. It was a record. Her only attempt to preserve the story of their journey. Not names or plans, just thoughts, fears, little notes to herself. But it was enough. Enough for a soldier to get suspicious. Enough for a lieutenant to order a deeper search. And enough for them to take her. Etienne returned that day from the far end of the field. He found the door kicked in, the drawers scattered, and blood. Just a little. Enough to know she hadn't gone willingly. The neighbors were silent. Not cruel, just afraid. In war, everyone becomes a statue when soldiers knock. Etienne did not scream. He did not run to the garrison. He did not light candles or write poems. He dug a grave, and left it empty. Then he did what he had done once before. He disappeared. Again. He re-emerged 1 week later. He didn't go back to the resistance. That life was burned. His contacts gone. His face still too recognizable. But he did not leave Montvert either. Instead, he became a shadow with calloused hands. He rebuilt the house. He replanted the fields. And when the Allies finally landed in Normandy and began pushing south, Etienne said nothing. He watched the front draw nearer, village by village. He watched refugees pass with carts. He heard the distant guns at night. But the field, that was the problem. He noticed it the first week of August, 1944. The soil was wrong. He'd walked this land for over a year. He knew the slope, the crunch, the color of dry earth under his fingernails. But now, strange patches. Slightly too flat. Too uniform. He dug in one spot. Found metal. He left it. Dug another. More metal. Then wiring. Then the unmistakable ticking shape of a German S-mine, bouncing Betty, as the Americans would come to know them. The field wasn't a trap. It was a killing ground. He could have gone to the mayor. But the mayor feared the Germans more than he trusted the Allies. He could have waited for bomb disposal unit. But the Americans were moving fast. The field sat on the only road eastward that hadn't been cratered by Luftwaffe withdrawal mines. And time was not on their side. So he made the decision. He went to the barn, took the kerosene, lit a match, and set fire to his own life. The villagers didn't understand. They wouldn't until the mines began to cook off, popping like firecrackers under the blaze. One. Then another. Then another. The smoke carried the truth. The wheat had been a graveyard in waiting. And the farmer? He had saved them all. But only because he had once disappeared. Twice. The first explosion came 5 minutes after the fire touched the third row of wheat. At first, it sounded like a popping rock, a single crack, like dry wood snapping inside a bonfire. Then a second, sharper blast followed, louder, flatter. Not natural. Not wood. The men on the hill flinched. By the third explosion, no one had any doubt. It was a mine. The Americans dove behind their jeep. The French villagers scattered behind low stone walls. Smoke covered the field like a funeral sheet. In the distance, the fire burned forward in orange waves, low and steady. And then all hell broke loose. The buried explosives didn't detonate in sequence. They erupted like a string of curses, uneven, furious, unpredictable. The wheat field had become a battlefield. Some of the mines were anti-tank, Teller mines, pressure-triggered, capable of flipping a half-track. Others were anti-personnel S-mines, designed to leap into the air and shred flesh at waist height. There were even buried grenades, rigged with tripwires and blast cords, packed tight under clumps of root. One by one, as the fire licked across the earth, the ground responded with violence. Pillars of dirt and debris shot into the air, punctuating the smoke like exclamation marks of death. Shrapnel pinged off trees and tore into the burned-out husks of old fences. And Etienne stood at the edge of it all, unmoved. The kerosene can sat empty at his feet. He held the shovel like a rifle. Lieutenant Charles Hanford, 29 years old and newly posted from Naples, was the first Allied officer on the scene. He arrived with dust on his boots, a .45 on his hip, and confusion in his eyes. Who gave the order to clear this field? He shouted it 3 times. Nobody answered. By then, Etienne had resumed digging, not to plant but to uncover. The fire had triggered some mines, but not all. Dozens more smoldered just beneath the surface, blackened but unbroken, waiting. Hanford crossed the field's edge cautiously, flanked by a French translator and 2 combat engineers. They expected a saboteur, a traitor, or, at best, a man so mad with grief that he'd lit his own life on fire. What they found was a ghost with a purpose. Etienne didn't look up as the boots approached. He only said 2 words. Still live. Hanford blinked. What? Etienne pointed with the shovel at a small metal plate just beneath a burst clump of earth. You step here, you die. The engineer bent down. Eyes widened. Then he found another. And another. In 20 minutes they marked 26 mines, most undetonated, their triggers black with soot but functional. Hanford removed his cap. Jesus Christ! You just saved a whole company. It didn't end with praise. Military bureaucracy doesn't move at the speed of fire or instinct. Etienne was detained. Not arrested, not quite, but brought into the command post for clarification. They asked who had given him intel about the minefield. They asked how he knew where the Germans had planted explosive. They asked why he hadn't reported it to the mayor or the Allied authorities. Etienne gave the same answer each time. Because by the time they believed me, you'd be dead. That didn't sit well. They threatened him with obstruction of military operations. The interpreter hesitated translating that part. Hanford stepped in, voice quiet but firm. You really think this man obstructed anything? The engineers weighed in. They'd never seen a field this densely mined. The mine density was military grade. Someone had laid it systematically. The road next to the field? It was the only passable route for 10 kilometers. Had the Allies advanced through that lane without the fire? The engineers estimated no fewer than 80 to 100 fatalities, possibly more, depending on how the mine's chain reacted under vehicle pressure. Etienne asked for a map. They gave him one, the tactical spread covering the area around Montvert. He circled the field. Then he drew a skull. Not an X, not a dot. A skull. With no eyes. Just empty holes where faces go. Hanford stared at it for a long time. Then, quietly, he asked, How did you know? And Etienne finally answered with more than a sentence. Because they came through here last month. Germans. Not soldiers. Engineers. They didn't knock. They didn't talk. They just moved through the edge of the field. And when they left, the ground was flat. Too flat. You learn to notice flat things after you've buried too many people. Hanford asked him if he had military experience. Etienne said, no. Then added, not the kind with medals. The lieutenant didn't push. In the days that followed, bomb disposal units combed the entire area. They found 147 mines in that one field alone. Plus 6 grenades traces. Plus 2 anti-tank charges wired to the oak tree at the road's bend. Had any vehicle, Allied or civilian, crossed the field's outer edge, the entire plot would have become a killing zone. The wheat, tall and perfect, had hidden it all, and now that wheat was gone. Not harvested, not milled, not baked into bread for a village, just starting to believe in survival again. But no one cursed the loss. The villagers, who had once shaken their heads at Etienne's madness, brought him food, wine, tools. They offered to help rebuild the shed that had partially burned. He declined most of it. Took only a loaf of black bread and a single nail puller. You can tell a lot about a man by how he rebuilds, he said. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Allied command. A commendation. It said the following. Civilian action taken under duress and uncertainty likely prevented considerable loss of Allied life. This individual acted with initiative, courage, and sound tactical judgment. Suggested for civil recognition upon formal liberation. Etienne never read it. The mayor brought it to him in a crumpled envelope, proud as a rooster. He opened it, read the first 2 lines, then tossed it in the stove. I don't need a medal for burning wheat, he said. The field lay black for a season. No one asked when he would replant it. Some fields carry ghosts too long to hold new life right away. Children would sneak to the edge and stare at the blackened soil, pointing at twisted pieces of iron still lodged in the dirt. Soldiers would pass the road, slow their trucks, and glance once at the scarred landscape, then continue. And Etienne? He kept to himself, not because he feared questions, but because the answer had already been given, in fire and ash and the thunder beneath the wheat. He did what needed to be done. Nothing more. Nothing less. The metal was made of bronze. A small, round disc, stamped with a wreath and a star, delivered in a box lined with felt that smelled of cardboard and stale glue. The mayor of Montvert received it by courier 2 months after the fire. The letter attached came from a French liaison office under Allied command, signed by 3 different officers and stamped with the Republic's seal. It praised exceptional civilian initiative under hostile conditions, credited Etienne Durand with saving countless Allied lives, and described him as a symbol of French resilience. They wanted to award it publicly. A ceremony. Photograph. A general in dress uniform shaking hands. A handshake for the history books. But Etienne never showed up. They waited an hour. The schoolyard had been cleaned, the children assembled in rows. American soldiers brought a band. The tricolor hung limp on the makeshift flagpole, waiting for a breeze. The mayor gave a speech, all about courage and vigilance and la resistance silencieuse. They paused twice for Etienne to arrive. He never did. At last, the mayor cleared his throat, handed the medal back to the aide, and muttered something about farmers and fieldwork. The crowd applauded out of politeness. That night, someone slipped the medal into Etienne's mailbox. The next morning, it was gone. No one ever saw it again. Etienne kept Marie's things exactly where she had left them. Her coat still hung behind the door, the collar folded just so. Her books, mostly poetry, a few faded volumes of Rousseau and Rimbaud, sat stacked on the bedside table. The notebook, the one the Germans had found, remained sealed in a cloth pouch in the back of the drawer, bound now by twine, not to protect the contents but to prevent himself from opening it. He never touched the grave he dug for her. Not because he thought she was alive, but because grief had no expiration date, and the soil was already heavy with enough silence. Captain Ewan Thorne was the one who tried hardest to change his mind. A tall, careful man with clear French and clearer intentions, he visited Etienne weeks after the ceremony that wasn't. He came without brass, without photographers, and without fanfare. He brought two things: a bottle of scotch and the minefield map, now cleared, marked, catalogued, and dated. "I came to thank you," Thorne said, placing the map on the table. Etienne didn't answer. "You saved our transport route. Kept us on schedule. Our entire push toward Lyon ran through that road." Still silence. "You could have just told someone." Etienne finally looked up. "No one listens to farmers." Thorne hesitated. "They're listening now." "Too late," Etienne said. When spring came, the field still lay fallow. People offered to help till it, plant it again, bring it back. He refused, every time. "Fields that serve death don't grow food," he said once. But the truth was heavier than poetry. Every shovel of soil still turned up reminders: blackened shrapnel, wire, twisted iron teeth. The land would grow again one day, yes. But not for him. The wheat had once fed the village. Now, the memory of it protected them more than food ever could. They remembered the fire. And they remembered the farmer. One morning, a girl from the village, maybe 7 years old, red hair, missing one front tooth, came to Etienne's door with a wicker basket. Inside, eggs, bread, and 2 wildflowers. "For your wife," she said cheerfully. He froze. Tried to speak. Failed. The girl tilted her head. "She's not back yet?" Etienne shook his head slowly. She nodded with the casual wisdom only children possess. "Well," she said, "I'll come back next week. Maybe then." She walked away barefoot, leaving the basket behind. Etienne closed the door with both hands. And for the first time in months, he sat down, cradled his head, and wept. That night, he reopened the metal box. The metal gleamed dully in the lamplight, too clean, too bright for his table. He stared at it for a long time. Not out of pride. Out of confusion. The object meant nothing to him. It was a thank you offered by strangers after the danger had passed. A memory that wanted to be recorded instead of remembered. He understood medals. He'd seen them before, pinned to cowards who had sent better men to die, draped on the chests of generals who had only arrived after the bullets stopped flying. He didn't need the Republic's recognition. He needed one person back. And that wasn't part of any citation. He dropped the medal into the fire. It hissed once, then fell silent. In the years that followed, Etienne remained in Montvert. He never remarried, never rejoined politics, never spoke at liberation parades or took interviews. Once, a reporter arrived, camera slung over his shoulder, looking for the man who saved the road to Lyon. Etienne was polite, served him tea, then said nothing of use. The reporter went home with 4 pages of notes about wind patterns and barley blight. He never published a word. When asked, gently, rarely, why he never spoke of the mines or the war or the fire, Etienne would shrug. But the truth was more complicated. Because there was something he couldn't say. Not even to himself. Something that lived at the center of the silence. Marie had been taken because of a mistake. A notebook. A risk she took to remember their life. She believed that after the war, the stories would matter. He had believed survival was enough. And when she was gone, he stopped believing in both. The fire he lit wasn't just to burn the mines. It was to burn the war away, once and for all, even if just in one small corner of the world. He didn't want medals. He wanted peace. And if peace required silence, then silence would be his service. The war ended long ago. The maps changed. The guns were silenced. The medals collected dust. France stood again, scarred but whole. Men who once fought in the mud now sold insurance. Women who ran safehouses now tended flowerbed. Villages rebris. Cities pulsed with new life. But in Montvert, the fields still remembered. And so did one man. Etienne Durand, once a ghost in the resistance, once a phantom who set his farm ablaze, lived out his days in the same quiet rhythm as before. Up before sunrise. Coffee black and silent. Tools gathered. No fanfare. No complaints. The kind of man the world always overlooked. And that suited him fine. They came years later. Young men in pressed uniforms, not for war, but for remembrance. A military history unit sent by the Ministry of Defense. They had a project, something about mapping civilian contributions during the war, cataloging unsung actions of tactical significance. They had found reports, coordinates, after-action memos. One field kept showing up. Montvert. The fire. The minefield. The farmer. They found him still alive. Older now, of course. White hair, back slightly stooped, but eyes as clear as ever. They asked to interview him. He said no. They asked again. He said no, but offered them coffee. So they sat, young and eager, surrounded by old furniture and thicker silences than they were used to. Why did you burn the field? They asked. He stirred his sugar slowly. Because I couldn't dig it all up fast enough. But how did you know it was mined? He took a long breath. The wheat was too perfect. Germans don't leave gifts. What the young men didn't tell him was what they had discovered. Declassified documents. German engineering logs. The field had been designated Zone Rotfuchs, Red Fox Zone, a kill corridor meant to eliminate Allied armor during the Dragoon advance. According to Wehrmacht records, the mines had been laid by trained sappers over 3 nights. Triple layered. Wired to secondary triggers. Total casualty projection, 300 to 500 soldiers and vehicles. It was the largest single minefield in the Rhône sector. But the mines never killed a soul. Because Etienne had lit a match. In 1978, long after the field had been planted again, with barley now, not wheat, the local council erected a stone marker near the old road. It was modest. Just a block of granite, hand-cut, with words etched deep. To the unknown who turned fire into life. Montvert, August 1944. No name. Etienne had insisted. They asked several times. He said no every time. He was never there for the unveiling. Instead, he was in his shed, sharpening tools that didn't need sharpening. Because some hands don't know what to do unless they're working. One fall morning, a man came to visit. He was tall, maybe 50, with a map and a photograph in hand. His French was broken, but he carried the kind of sincerity that crosses language. He found Etienne near the field's edge, repairing a broken cart wheel. The man introduced himself slowly. My father, James El Garrison. He was in the 45th Infantry. He came through here. August 1944. Etienne paused. The name wasn't familiar, but the uniform patch was. The Thunderbird, U.S. 45th. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. It's from him. He wanted, if I ever came to France, he wanted you to have this. Etienne took it with careful hands. The letter was written decades earlier. Faded ink. Scrawled handwriting. Asterisk to the Frenchman who burned his own field. You saved us. We didn't know your name, but we knew what you did. I've never forgotten it. Never will. My son is alive because I walked through that field and not over it. Merci. J.G. Asterisk. Etienne didn't speak. He folded the letter, slipped it into his pocket, and stared at the tree line. Then, softly, he said, I didn't do it for thanks. The American nodded. I know. That's why it mattered. The last year of Etienne's life was uneventful. He mended what needed mending. Sat on the porch in the evenings. Listened to wind move through trees like old soldiers whispering. He had no children. No surviving family. But he was never truly alone. Villagers brought him bread and jam. Children waved to him on bicycles. Soldiers, now old men, would sometimes pass through, place a small flag at the stone, then tip their hats toward the farmhouse. He would nod. Say nothing. Let the silence carry what words could not. In late autumn, he fell ill. Nothing dramatic. Just the quiet slowing of a body that had already given too much. The mayor came. The doctor. A few neighbors. He said very little, except this. Don't forget the wheat. Keep it clean. Keep it honest. He passed in his sleep, sometime before sunrise. It was a cold morning. The kind that made the soil stiff and the sky soft. There were no parades. No gun salutes. Just a small funeral. A wooden box. One folded letter slipped into the casket. They buried him near the edge of the field. Not in a marked grave, but in the dirt he had once saved. Years later, someone planted poppies there. They grew taller than the barley. Red as fire. Soft as memory. War stories often end with flags waving and bugles sounding. This one ends with a man who didn't want to be remembered, and who, because of that, deserves to be. Because for every battlefield covered in glory, there's a field that never became one, because someone made a hard decision long before the enemy arrived. For every medal that shines under lights, there's one that melted in a stove. And for every soldier saved, there's someone who lit a match and walked away.